Thank you everyone for joining our monthly Circle of Life Coalition presentation. I will introduce our speaker soon, but a couple of housekeeping things. Please keep your microphone muted and your video will be off during the presentation so that we get the best quality recording to post on YouTube and Facebook and our website so that you could share with everyone that you love and care about and definitely benefit from the presentation today. Also, this will be for this year and the beginning of 2023, our last live and virtual. We will just be virtual for the foreseeable future right now. Our community has a high caseload of RSV, other respiratory illnesses, flu A, please get your flu shot, and COVID is still here and impairing our vulnerable population. So we figured virtual was best for all concerned. You can go to Circle of Life Coalition.org to do a donation, review materials that we have online, resources, and other very interesting content. You can sign up on our website to receive information regarding future presentations. Every month, we do have a sponsor for our presentations. If you are a business that would like to get the word out about your product or service and have that on our recordings that you could send people to listen to the recording and see and learn more about your business, please contact us. And for a small fee, you can be a sponsor for the presentation. Our sponsor this month is anonymous, as many times lately, folks just want to give to our fine organization. We also are always looking for volunteers to help with any fundraising, with any ideas for presentations, as well as other small duties that take very little of your time throughout the month. So without further ado, I am so happy and proud to have with us Dominic Murgido. He has been a wonderful supporter of the Circle of Life Coalition for many years, a board member, an active advisory council member with robust ideas. He earned multiple degrees in criminal justice, instructed college courses as an adjunct professor at Alvernia University, and is a master copy roaster. He retired from careers in retail, loss prevention, and social services. He founded a grief support group, Said Spirit, a few years after the sudden unexpected death of his wife. He publishes a quarterly newsletter of the same name. Beside being a grief advocate who provides support and solace to those who are grieving, Dominic is also an advocate for safe driving by providing awareness and a voice to legislators to increase education and training for safe driving practices, as well as penalties as they relate to traffic violations that cause injury and death. He is also a writer, editor, commentator, and highly regarded speaker. He's the author of 2 books, Miss Your Forever, Reflections After Death of a Spouse, and his most recent book, In a Heartbeat, a tale of reflection, faith, hope, and resilience. He can be reached at dominicmurgido.com, and his book can be purchased anywhere that you can buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, bookstores, the old-fashioned things. He certainly knows how to live our mission of the Circle of Life Coalition and teaches us every day. We envision an informed community open to honest conversations about life and death, one in which we inspire each other to live life fully while acknowledging the inevitability of death, and where choices for end-of-life care are effectively communicated, documented, respected, and honored. Get on up here. Without further ado, here's Dominic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deb, for that very nice introduction. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's certainly a pleasure to be here to speak with you today. I think I'm going to start out by saying grief. We all go through it. And not just the grief associated with the loss of a loved one. We grieve the loss of a job or a career. We grieve the loss of a relationship or a marriage. We also grieve the loss of a friendship for some unknown reason that happened. The loss of an opportunity. We grieve the loss of our own health or the health of a loved one we hold dearly. We also grieve the loss of our mobility as we get older, or perhaps we're in an accident of some kind that made us disabled. We also grieve the loss of memory as we get older. We grieve the loss of a future we thought we'd have. That's not going to happen. We grieve the loss of possibilities. And sometimes we grieve the loss of not telling someone we love them and we can't anymore. But today, I'm focusing on the kind of grief that I have learned to live with. The tragic loss of my wife, Sue, more than a decade ago, when she was killed by a distracted driver in a vehicle accident. It's been a long time since that happened, but it's certainly something I can't forget. I've been able to live with that grief and the loss of my wife through so many ways of trying to live with my grief in a positive way. I'm going to share a lot of that with you today. And probably the best way to do it is to walk you through a timeline, my own timeline. And keep in mind that timelines of grief will be different for everybody. My timeline will be different than yours. But I think by sharing my timeline, what I went through, will be helpful to all of you. The timeline I'm going to go through in a short manner or in an abbreviated manner can be found in my first book that I wrote called Miss You Forever. It's in the back of the book, and I give you that short timeline. And after I completed that timeline at the end of that first book, it made me realize that that timeline should be expanded upon. People should know detail. So I took the timeline from the end of the first book and made that be the second book. And the second book being In a Heartbeat, which follows that exact timeline in greater detail of me going through my grief for a 13-year period. Anyway, let's go back to that timeline, or start the timeline. The timeline begins right after she was killed, a sudden, unexpected loss. That morning, I was married, happily married for 26 and a half years. And by 2:30 that afternoon, I was a widower, and I never saw it coming. I can still remember coming across the accident scene because that's how I found her. That's how I found out. It's by coming across the accident scene, searching for her because she didn't show up for work. So I took the route she took, and I found her, or I found the accident scene, a horrible picture. Yeah, flashing lights, first responders, fire trucks, police, caution tape, cones, the smell of gas and oil, metal, twisted metal. She was no longer at the scene. They had already taken her to the hospital. But I remember collapsing in front of a police officer who told me that she didn't make it. I remember just falling down, and I kind of remember grabbing the police officer's pant leg as I collapsed. I was in such shock. But that was just the beginning of a long journey. So that entire first year was just shock for me. I was just going through the motions of life. A lot of it I don't remember, to be honest with you. But I was just in a state of shock that you just went through the motions. You got up, you went to work, you came home, you ate, you slept, repeat. And it was just terrible. That whole first year, within the first 3 or 4 days, I just started to, I didn't know what to do. I was at such a loss. I lost the love of my life. I ended up getting up in the middle of the night and just writing down on paper or on 3x5 cards. Still use them today. I've been writing on 3x5 cards, just random thoughts, maybe one word, swear words even, how angry I was, how depressed I was. And those 3x5 cards turned into journaling that I started doing every day. And those journals eventually ended up to my writing, articles, eventually the books, the newsletters, and they continue today. But anyway, that was a therapy for me. The writing, the journaling, the expressing my feelings. I also needed help, outside help. And I went and searched out a support group at St. Joseph's. Sister Rose had at the time, which was very helpful for me, but it ended after 7 weeks and I needed more. And she guided me to an 800 number, which got me connected to Compassionate Care Hospice out of Middletown. And I ended up driving to Middletown once a month for an hour from Reading to Middletown to attend a bereavement support group, general. And I did that for years. And while I was doing that, I'm reading all these grief books. I'm trying to learn what I'm dealing with. And I'm also attending a one-on-one therapy with a counselor or therapist, which really helped me. And I did that for a number of years. But beyond that first year, contrary to what most people say, it doesn't stop after a year. Because the second year was my hardest. My second year in my timeline, I describe as pain and a fear of uncertainty. Because in the second year, you now realize this really happened to me. She's not coming through that door again. The garage door won't be coming up. She won't be taking the dog for a walk. She's gone. And then that sets in reality to you. That was so difficult for that second year. But I had my support. I was going to a therapist. I was going to support groups. I was doing my journal. It was just trying to help me get together. Then came the third year. And the third year, I always call this is the year of limbo. I'm in limbo. I don't know where I'm at. I'm in limbo to the point that, should I do this or should I do that? Where are my feelings about this? What am I going to do? So I call it a year of limbo because I really wasn't sure. And I started really thinking about where's my life headed now without her? I started really thinking about that. Those first 2 years, I wasn't even near that point of thinking of that. It took me to the third year to think, now what do I do? And then I realized at that point of my grief timeline that, you know what, I don't like doing what I'm doing anymore. I didn't like the career I was in. Even though there was nothing wrong with the career I was in, loved my job, but it just didn't feel right. I needed something to do different. I needed a change. I needed to make a choice. And ultimately, I needed to take a risk. And boy, that's something that no griever wants to do. You're afraid. You're used to the way your life was. And now you're thinking, wow, changes, choices, risks? That's scary. But I knew I had to do something because I just wasn't settled. I had to do something different with my life. And deep down, as much as the support groups and the therapist and my reading about grief and my writing about grief, as much as all of that was happening and very helpful to me, there was something within me that I just couldn't come to terms with. I didn't know what it was. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew there was something holding me back. So with a lot of thought, I decided to retire from the job. 30-year career, walked away. Gave it 2 weeks notice, took a year off to really collect my thoughts, and then took a big step and decided to relocate. Just move, sell the house, go to another state, start over, try to start over, try to come to grips with my new life without her. And that's what I did. I moved, I relocated. And it was time at that point where a new normal would have to begin. I would have to adapt to the change I just made, the choice I made, the risk I'm taking. And then from that point, I'd have to come up with some kind of new normal that would begin and would be eventually established. And then about 3 years later, being in the new place, another change. I had to regroup, I had to reflect what I was doing, and I decided to relocate back to Pennsylvania. But before I did, the catalyst for my journey to be 3 years away from where I left was something that was so evident to me while I was away. I realized what was holding me back. I found what was bothering me. And what it was unknown to me and buried deep in my subconscious was the fact that I hated the driver, the distracted driver, the negligent, reckless driver that took my life away from me. And I've never been a man of hate. And I realized in order to move forward, I had to forgive him. That ain't easy. Forgiveness is not easy. But I knew I could not go forward without relieving myself of that burden. So I prayed about it. I meditated about it. And after 6-9 months, I was able to forgive him for me. And that made me feel renewed. It made me feel I had regrowth within me. And I moved back to Pennsylvania. With that energy, with that rebirth, with that regrowth. Yeah. So I came back to Pennsylvania, feeling a lot better than I did when I left. And I just started a life again. I went back to teaching at Alvernia. I got involved with volunteer efforts that still continued reading more, still continued what have you, but also started the support group, which happened a little bit before that. But I had my own support group called Subspirit that I developed to help others grieving from the loss of a spouse. And I was doing fine until the one thing that was bothering me, again, the second thing bothering me, lots of things bother you when you're grieving people. But the one thing that bothered me was the one thing that stayed with me for 10 years after she died was that accident scene I came across that was burned into my head, my mind's eye. And every time I saw an accident scene in that 10-year period, when I was out and about driving, I would like get an anxiety attack. If I came across it and I saw another one, I'd have to pull over. I'd have to just sit there and collect myself, just cry it out before I continued on. And I reached a point 10 years later thinking, I have to get better with this. I can't go through my entire life. I spent 10 years doing this. I must get better. So what I ended up doing was 10 years to the day of the accident, I went to the accident scene. Big risk, big choice to do. But I needed to see it normal. I needed to see people stopping at the traffic light. I needed to see the small business on the corner. I needed to see the way it looked normally, not the way I saw it the last time I was there. And it's a big risk because I didn't know how I'd react to it. But it worked. After visualizing it the way it is normal, I was able, from that point on, when I came across an accident, and unfortunately, we see them all the time, I was able to get by it without an anxiety attack. That healed me, that solved my problem. Throughout this whole time of my grief timeline, there was one constant that was always there for me. And I didn't mention it yet, but I will now. And that constant was my dog, Hal. And Hal was my wife's dog. He was a Blue Merle Shetland sheepdog. They did everything together. Hal and Sue were inseparable. Unfortunately, Sue only got to be with Hal for 3 years. Got him as a puppy. She worked with him for 3 years before she was killed. And she gave me a blessing in disguise. That dog was a therapy dog for me. He was trained in therapy by Sue to be a therapy dog. She would take him to assisted living facilities, nursing homes, hospitals. She used to take him up to Wernersville State Hospital. I mean, they went everywhere together helping people. And Hal became my helper. Hal became my therapy dog. And he stayed with me for 12 years. 12 years he stayed with me after she died. Until unfortunately, he too had passed, the end of 2017. That was a difficult loss for me, losing that dog. That dog meant so much to me. It put me back into therapy full time. I actually attended a pet loss support group in Allentown for a full year, dealing with the loss of Hal. It was incredible. And it was a new thing for me now, because now another change, another choice. I had to go forward from not having Hal being that support and that giving me that unconditional love to not having Hal. I now had to look another direction for myself. I had to learn to live with the grief of Hal's loss, in addition to my wife's. So that whole year after Hal was a big adjustment. And from that point on up to now, my life has been pretty much of the timeline being, I'm acknowledging my feelings, I am accepting my feelings, and I'm adapting to them to move forward. And also I'm trying to help other people through the efforts of my support group, my writings, my newsletters, my books. That's pretty much the timeline in its entirety in a nutshell. Again, more details in a heartbeat in the book, but I wanted to give you an idea how far I've come and what I've done in the last 16, 17 years that it's been. But you know, in all of my readings and research and experiences with doing the support group and talking to other people, I've come to the conclusion that grief is a path to be walked, but it is not a destination. Grief is not something that we are destined to go towards. We walk its path, but we're not there to get to it. Grief is energy. I'm going to call out grief right now. Grief requires witness. It requires people to listen to you. And it requires you to be heard about what's hurting you. It needs witness. Doesn't need to be fixed. Just listen to. Nothing, absolutely nothing we grieve is little. We need grounding while we grieve. Crying heals us. Believe it or not, tears of grief are very different than tears of pain or happiness. Grief is a living thing. And grief is not to be understood, but to be lived. You have to go through grief to understand it and embrace it. You can't go around grief. It'll come back and hurt you years later. You have to find your own relationship with it, as I've shared with you, with mine. Grief is life. And grief is the price we pay for love. No question about that. You know, one term that has been in a lot of my reading and a lot of getting in conversations that I've had with other people, a term has come up quite often, and it's post-traumatic growth. Not post-traumatic stress, as we've often hear. Post-traumatic growth. And I've heard a lot of facilitators of grief groups use it. I've heard a lot of other colleagues of mine have used that term. And basically, it's interesting when you think about it this way. Post-traumatic growth, our subconscious mind buries trauma we experience, whatever that trauma is. And of course, in my case, I'm talking about the grief. And we revisit moments in time to reshape where we are today. We go back into our minds, we go back into the past, and we revisit those moments. Our soul goes through the transformation in the process and allows growth, understanding, and adaptation. And that's how the post-traumatic growth becomes part of us and gives us to a higher place, makes us go to a higher place. What we have to learn to do is we have to learn to use adversity to fuel that growth. The adversity that we're going through, whatever that may be, we have to try to use that to fuel the growth that we need in order to succeed and to do well in life. And that's a great segue into resilience, in a sense, when you think about it. And I'm going to select an item I wrote in my book about resilience. Figured if I wrote it once before, I don't want to misspeak my work here, but I thought I'd share a little bit from you about what I wrote about resilience in a heartbeat. Resilience can be defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. It can also be looked as the ability to mentally or emotionally cope with a crisis or to return to pre-crisis status relatively quickly. It is how we respond to adversity. Resilience capabilities are built within most of us. We must be open to utilize our skills to activate it when we need it the most. Throughout life, we learn and apply what life experiences happen to us, and we recognize that we have and know our gratitude. It allows us to think that things could be worse. We have to think of ourselves in terms of today. How do we feel today? How are we today? Don't look at ourselves tomorrow or the next day of the week or the month. Think of today and today only, one day at a time. It took me so long to come to this realization. We must also find permanence. It's too easy to feel that the adversity you are going through will never end. It will end. It is not permanent, only temporary. Most things are. You have to believe in that. You have faith and hope that you will get through this. Along with this, we must stop feeling guilty and beating ourselves up about the situation that we are in. I felt so guilty about losing my wife even though I wasn't even near her or in the car with her at the time of her death. We have to be kind to ourselves. I began to journal shortly after her death, allowing myself to just write down what I was feeling, however horrible it was. Some people write down 3 good things that happened to them at the end of every day and feel grateful for them. Focus on small wins. Focus on baby steps towards something positive. In the end, this will make you be able to take back some of the happiness that once left you. You will feel better about yourself and your situation. You will feel more content with the person you are and your future. Concentrate on you, and at the end of each day, think of the 3 moments of joy you experienced. And if you want, write them down in a journal. That's what I did and still do. You know, the one thing that got me more involved with the resilience part of the post-traumatic growth and things of that nature is the one thing I remember saying that first year. And this one thing, after I said this, I realized I had to do something with my life. And that thing I remember saying, pretty much out loud, the only one hearing me was Hal at the time, was, there's no way I'm ever coming back from this. And I was convinced of that. I remember shouting it, there's no way I'm ever coming back from this loss, this defeat, this despair. And that was scary that I said that and believed it. So I came up with 3 things that I'm going to share with you that helped me and that hopefully will help you. If you're ever in a thing where you're saying those words like I said, these are 3 things to keep in mind. Number 1, we have to acknowledge that bad things happen to everyone. Suffering is part of human existence. None of us are entitled to a perfect life. Bad things just happen. And the more we acknowledge that, the better we'll understand it. Number 2, look for and accept the good. Know what you can change and accept what you cannot. Too often we spend time trying to change something we have no control over. You can always find positives somewhere in your life, so really search for them. And search for them when you're at your lowest point, because that's when you need to find them. And the third thing, ask yourself at that time that you're shouting out that phrase, is what you're doing working for you right now? Is what you're doing right now with yourself working for you? Is the way you're thinking or the way you're acting, is it helping or is it harming you? And be honest with your response to that question to yourself. In your quest to get through adversity, is the way you're thinking or the way you're acting helping or harming you? Interesting question. But those 3 questions really resonated with me and became part of my journey and where I was at the time. Collected in both of my books are entries from my personal journals. These are raw emotions. These are things I actually wrote on those 3x5 cards that I was so vulnerable enough to publish them. But I think I hear a lot from people that have read the books, how much they've inspired them and realized that they were not alone, seeing some of the things I wrote that mimicked what they thought. I'm going to pick a couple out of Miss You Forever and read a few to you. as we conclude today. But this is one that I wrote. I couldn't tell you when I wrote this, but it's interesting. The length of time that has passed doesn't change your thinking of them daily. It strengthens your desire to keep them remembered and honored, always loved, never to be forgotten. And another one I wrote. All my life without her is a task, one that is always a challenge for me. And each step deserves a reflection of where I've been, how far I've come, and where I have yet to be. And a third one I wrote, I've grown without you in ways I've never seen coming. Some good, some lonely, some confusing, but always missing you and your love for me. And we'll conclude with, from In a Heartbeat, one paragraph that I wrote near the end of the book. Live a life that is honoring to their memory while life moves forward for you. Only one person has died, not two. It is a challenge to move forward with your new life while you're still long for the life you had. You can either stay in the trenches of grief or climb out in faith and hope to honor their memory and choose to be alive for what lies ahead of you. Live life to the fullest. Stay close to your family and friends. Enjoy every single day with a new sense of wonder. For more information about my support group, Sun Spirit, access to the free newsletter, information about my books, letters, resources for grief, just visit DominicMurgido.com. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Yay. Sorry for all the extra noise there. So someone in the audience wanted the rename of the books, and this is the second book, In a Heartbeat. All right, wherever fine books are sold. And the first book, Miss You Forever. Again, wherever fine books are sold. Okay. So would you mind sharing a little bit about what folks can find in the newsletter? Just because there's so much, and what maybe you've heard is beneficial.
Absolutely. Yeah, the newsletter, it's quarterly. It comes out seasonally. Right now, the fall issue is out. It's open to anybody that they could get for free, either by email, or you can see it on the website. It's also available on circleoflifecoalition.org. And inside the newsletter, there's always an article for myself that I write. Then I pull different articles appropriate about grieving, about loss, recovery from loss, from other sources that I include in the newsletter. There's always a quarterly quote that I put in. There's also a book review. Occasionally I'll read a book that I read that I'll put in a book review. Also, we put maybe sometimes we'll do a thoughts to ponder, read to think about. There's also a list of resources on the left-hand side, local resources to Reading, Berks County, and even Vermont, where I still have a chapter up there for Sun Spirit. And we also have the other side about our meeting dates. We do have live in-person meetings at the Exeter Community Library, usually the fourth Tuesday of every month, 6 o'clock. That shows you that contact information, the website address, and it's usually 4 pages long. Actually, the one coming out in the winter in January will be 6 pages long. They vary between 4 and 6 pages. So,
yeah, lots of good content, and sometimes just that one little reflection just helps you move on with the rest of your day, and it's certainly easy to go back to. Yes.
Just a comment about the newsletter. I've known Dom now for a long time, and I was still working as a social worker in the hospital when I first met him and started reading the newsletters. And I look forward to them every time because they're just such nuggets of comfort and information that I was able to share with so many other people. And still, once in a while, I'll hear about somebody and refer them. And I'm so pleased when the connection is made. So thank you, Dom, for that.
Someone asked, how do you navigate grieving around people that do not understand the process? Is this addressed in any of your books or maybe the newsletter?
there are some people that just don't get it. And until you go through it is when you really get it and understand what other people are going through. But when you have those people that just don't get it, sometimes my best advice is try not to convince them that they don't get it. You're going to get into an argument. And I hate to give this kind of advice, but it's helped me walk away. Surround yourself with people that are supportive of you. People that you can depend on, people that unfortunately understand and get it and part of the grief experience. And that's where support groups are great, because you're in a room with total strangers and they all get it. You're not related to them. They're not even your friends at the time. And you're shouting out your emotions and your feelings and they get it. They respond to you. You respond to them. So.
Yeah. And I could think there's different scenarios that you're in where folks don't understand either you're grieving and they don't understand they're grieving and they don't understand that it's a process, families, so forth. So meeting people where they're at is easy to say and hard to do, but that is exactly what you have to do. And for those you love and for yourself, you just are there when they're ready to face whatever it is, to face the grief. And that's just the best that you can do. And to walk away sometimes to prevent an argument or a family discord or a friend ripped from you're ripped from each other, then you're not there for each other is the best thing to do, most definitely. Yeah. Dr. Dan.
Can I suggest that it was the Holy Spirit serving as your advocate and counselor that helped you on that journey?
Absolutely. Totally agree with you.
Yes. For the person who asked that question, do you know of any other resources that perhaps they could tap into? Books, magazines, obviously the Sud Spirit newsletter is extremely helpful, but would it help for them to go to a grief support group or online grief support?
Yeah, I would strongly suggest that to the caller, or not a caller, to the person who posed the question. Grief support groups are very open, they're very welcoming, and you're going to have to find a support group that you feel comfortable with, and keep looking. I mean, if you go to one that it just doesn't fit right to you, then find another one. We have resources on my website at the end of the Sud Spirit tab about some support groups, some online support groups, as well as in-person ones. And also the resources in the newsletter will give them some information. A good source is 211.com, which you go in.
Or 211.org.
211.org.
Yeah.
It's a good resource, as well as United Way website. gives you some things where you can be part of or to understand where to go from there. So those are all kinds of ways to do it. And of course, now with social media, there's a lot more things happening that back when this happened to me, social media wasn't there yet. So, you had to be in a yellow pages or something like that.
Right, right. And just another thought, Dom's books are not instructional, but they're easy and interesting to read. So someone who doesn't understand, you might just say, this was a great book. It's not 400 pages long, but maybe you want to give it a whirl, give it a read, and that might help them start their journey. Hi.
Dom, I've known you a long time, and every time I hear this story, there's always something different about it, and it really breaks my heart to hear it, and it really hits me in my gut. Sitting here today, I bought the book while you were speaking, and I would highly recommend anyone listening to this should do the same. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think, I think reading a book is the beginning of feeling safe to express feelings for somebody that shies away from support groups. I know they work, but a lot of people, like you said, don't get it. And they say, I'm not going to do that. Sure, this person has had a loss, but they don't understand how I feel. It's not the same. Well, everybody has a different experience. But if you read a book, and those books are just touching on in so many different ways. And I think that's a good recommendation for somebody that isn't yet willing to go to a support group.
Right. Support seems to be like the trigger word. It hits a nerve. Support. Maybe call it the coffee chocolate club. But I mean, we can't do that. We can't deceive folks, but just maybe think of it that reframe things. That's right. This is my chocolate coffee club. So anyway, so there's great and moving presentation comment. Inspiring as always. Thank you for your insight and all that you do, Dominic. So I think with that, if there are no other questions, we'll leave on that. But I do want to share January's virtual presentation will be Lisa Frank. And I have the flyer pulled up, breathing into the new year. I'm pretty sure it's the title, but that will be the first Thursday. And there may be a different time, more to come about that. But either way, all of our presentations are available on YouTube, Facebook, and our website, circleoflifecoalition.org. Thank you so much for joining us in our safe space.